The dusty town of Willowbrook had seen many dramatic moments in its saloon, but nothing quite like what happened on that scorching Tuesday afternoon. Martha Henderson stood in the center of the crowded room, her face red with anger and her voice shaking with emotion. Her daughter Sarah sat quietly at a corner table, her eyes downcast and her hands folded tightly in her lap. "My daughter will marry no one," Martha cried out, her voice cutting through the conversations and card games that filled the smoky air. Every head turned toward her. Whiskey glasses paused halfway to lips, and even the piano player stopped his tune mid-note. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, like the dust that settled on everything in this desert town. Martha had good reasons for her fierce protection of Sarah. 3 years ago, her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving them with nothing but debts and broken dreams. Since then, men had come calling on 18-year-old Sarah, but Martha had seen through every one of them. Some wanted Sarah's beauty. Others thought they could get their hands on the small plot of land Martha still owned. None of them truly cared about her daughter's happiness or well-being. The townspeople whispered among themselves, some nodding in understanding while others shook their heads in disapproval. Mrs. Coleman, the banker's wife, pursed her lips and muttered something about unnatural mother's love. But Martha didn't care what they thought. She had raised Sarah alone through poverty and hardship, working as a seamstress and taking in laundry to keep food on their table. No smooth-talking man would take advantage of her precious daughter. Sarah herself had never spoken against her mother's decisions. She was a gentle soul with golden hair and kind blue eyes, always helping others in the community despite their own struggles. She had nursed sick children during the fever outbreak last winter, and helped elderly Mrs. Peterson with her garden every week. The truth was, Sarah had never found anyone who made her heart skip a beat anyway. She trusted her mother's judgment completely. But today felt different. There was electricity in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. Martha could feel it too, though she couldn't explain why her hands were trembling more than usual as she stood defiant in the saloon. The wooden doors creaked in the hot wind outside, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 3 times. The saloon keeper, old Pete, wiped his hands nervously on his apron and tried to lighten the mood. "Now, Martha, maybe we should all calm down But his words trailed off as the sound of approaching horse hooves grew louder outside. Heavy boots stepped onto the wooden porch and the saloon doors swung open with purpose. Everyone turned to see who was entering at this tense moment. Even Martha, despite her determination to protect Sarah from all men, found herself curious about the newcomer who seemed to command attention without saying a word. The afternoon sun created a silhouette in the doorway, and the whole saloon held its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah glanced up for the first time since her mother's outburst, something stirring in her chest that she had never felt before. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely, and everyone could sense that this moment would change everything for the Henderson women. Martha's protective stance wavered slightly as she realized that whatever was about to unfold would test her resolve. Like never before, the stage was set for a confrontation that would become the talk of Willowbrook for years to come, though none of them could have predicted just how profound the changes would be for everyone involved. The man who stepped through the saloon doors was unlike anyone Willowbrook had seen before. He stood at least 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard ranch work under the blazing sun. His dark hair was neatly combed despite the long ride into town, and his clothes, while simple, were clean and well-maintained. But it was his eyes that caught everyone's attention, deep brown and incredibly gentle, with a kindness that seemed to reach across the room. He removed his hat politely as he entered, revealing a face that was weathered but honest. There were lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who worked with livestock and mended fences. Yet there was something refined about him too, an education that showed in the way he carried himself and the careful way he chose his words. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice deep but not demanding. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." His gaze swept the room, taking in the tense atmosphere and Martha's defensive posture. When his eyes briefly met Sarah's, she felt her cheeks warm and quickly looked away, her heart beating faster than it ever had before. The rancher's name was Daniel McKenna, though nobody in the saloon knew that yet. He had ridden into Willowbrook that morning from his spread 30 miles north, where he ran cattle with just 2 hired hands and a lot of determination. At 28, he had built his ranch from nothing, sleeping under the stars for 2 years while he saved every penny to buy his first small herd. Now he owned 500 acres of good grazing land and had earned the respect of everyone in the county. But Daniel wasn't in town on business today. He had heard about Sarah Henderson from a traveling merchant who had stopped at his ranch for water. The merchant had mentioned the beautiful young woman who helped care for sick children and never asked for anything in return. More importantly, he had spoken of her kindness and gentle spirit, qualities that Daniel valued far more than physical beauty. "I was hoping to speak with Miss Henderson," Daniel continued, his hat still respectfully in his hands, "if that would be acceptable." His voice remained calm and patient, showing no irritation at the obviously tense situation he had walked into. He glanced at Martha with understanding in his eyes, as if he recognized the protective love of a mother who had been through hard times. Martha's jaw tightened. Here was another man, probably like all the others, coming to sweet-talk her daughter with false promises. She stepped forward slightly, placing herself between Daniel and Sarah. "My daughter is not receiving callers," she said firmly, though something in the stranger's manner made her less harsh than she had been with previous suitors. "I understand your concern." "Ma'am," Daniel replied, his tone respectful and patient. "I truly do. A mother's love for her daughter is something sacred, and you have every right to protect her." His words surprised everyone in the saloon, including Martha herself. Most men would have become angry or argumentative when faced with such immediate rejection. Sarah found herself listening intently to this stranger's voice. There was something different about him, something that made her want to look up and study his face more carefully. She could feel her mother's tension beside her, but she could also sense that this man was not like the others who had come calling. There was no arrogance in his voice, no assumption that he deserved her attention simply because he was a man. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, clearly thinking carefully about his next words. The saloon remained completely silent, every person hanging on what would happen next. Even the card players had abandoned their games to watch this unusual exchange. Old Pete had stopped wiping glasses and stood frozen behind the bar, recognizing that something special was unfolding. "Perhaps I could just introduce myself properly," Daniel said finally, addressing his words to both women but keeping his eyes respectfully on Martha. "My name is Daniel McKenna, and I own the Circle M ranch north of here. I've come to town today not to demand anything, but simply to ask permission to speak with your daughter about helping with something important." Martha's eyebrows drew together in confusion. In all her years of turning away suitors, none had ever asked to speak with Sarah about helping with something important. They always talked about courting, marriage, or taking walks together. This was different, and it caught her completely off guard. "What kind of help?" Martha asked suspiciously, though her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. She noticed how Daniel kept his distance, never moving closer or trying to intimidate her with his size. Most men would have stepped forward by now, using their physical presence to make their point. This rancher seemed content to stand exactly where he was, waiting patiently for permission. Daniel's face grew serious, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of deep emotion cross his features. "I have a young niece," he began slowly, choosing each word carefully. "Her name is Emma, and she's only 7 years old. Her parents, my brother and his wife, died in a typhoid outbreak 6 months ago." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the saloon. Everyone knew the pain of losing family members to disease. "Emma has been living with me since then," Daniel continued, his voice growing softer. "But I'm afraid I'm not very good at caring for a little girl. She needs a woman's guidance, someone who understands how to help a child through grief. I've heard about Miss Henderson's kindness with children, how she helped during the fever last winter. I was hoping she might be willing to visit Emma, perhaps teach her some of the things a young lady should know." Sarah's heart clenched with sympathy. She could picture a scared little girl alone in the world except for an uncle who was trying his best but felt helpless. Without thinking, she started to rise from her chair, but her mother's sharp look made her sit back down immediately. "You're asking my daughter to come to your ranch?" Martha asked, her protective instincts flaring again. "Alone with you and this child?" "Absolutely not." The very idea seemed dangerous to her. How many men had used similar stories to trick young women into compromising situations? But Daniel was already shaking his head. No, ma'am, not alone. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who has been helping with Emma. She's a good woman, very proper, and she would be there at all times. Also, Miss Henderson would be welcome to bring anyone she chose as a companion. He paused, looking directly at Martha, including you, of course. I would be honored to have you both as guests. This invitation to include Martha shocked everyone in the saloon, including Martha herself. No suitor had ever suggested that she come along when courting her daughter. The idea was unheard of. Men wanted to get young women away from their protective mothers, not invite the mothers to watch everything that happened. Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. This man genuinely seemed to care about doing things properly, about making everyone feel safe and comfortable. She found herself wanting to help the little girl he described, but more than that, she found herself curious about Daniel McKenna himself. What kind of man took in an orphaned niece and worried about doing right by her? Furthermore, Daniel added, reaching into his shirt pocket, I'm prepared to pay Miss Henderson for her time and expertise. Caring for children is valuable work, and it should be compensated. He pulled out a small leather pouch that jingled softly with coins. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking to hire someone with the skills Emma needs. Martha's mouth fell open slightly. Not only was this man offering to pay Sarah, but he was treating her daughter's abilities as professional skills worth compensating. No one in Willowbrook had ever suggested that Sarah's way with children was anything more than natural feminine instinct. This rancher was offering her actual employment with wages and respect. I don't need an answer today, Daniel said gently, sensing that he had given them a lot to think about. I'll be staying at the hotel tonight and riding back tomorrow afternoon. If you decide you'd like to help Emma, I would be grateful. If not, I understand completely. He put his hat back on and touched the brim respectfully. Thank you for listening to me. The saloon buzzed with excited whispers as Daniel turned to leave. This was nothing like what anyone had expected when the tall rancher walked through the doors. Instead of demanding attention or pushing for an immediate answer, he was giving the Henderson women time and space to make their decision. Even Martha found herself impressed despite her determination to protect Sarah from all men. That evening, the Henderson women sat in their small kitchen, the oil lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah had barely touched her supper of beans and cornbread, her mind completely occupied with thoughts of little Emma and the gentle rancher who cared for her. She kept thinking about the sadness she had glimpsed in Daniel's eyes when he spoke of his orphaned niece. Mother, Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they left the saloon. What if that little girl really does need help? She twisted her napkin in her hands, trying to find the right words. You know how lost children can be when they lose their parents. Remember how I was after Papa died? Martha's heart squeezed painfully at the memory. Sarah had been 15 when her father died, old enough to understand death but young enough to be devastated by it. For months she had barely spoken, moving through their days like a ghost. It had taken patience, love, and time to bring her daughter back to life. A 7-year-old would be even more lost and confused. I've been thinking about Mr. McKenna all afternoon, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. Did you notice how he spoke to us? He didn't ignore you or treat you like you were in the way. Most men act like mothers are obstacles to remove. He invited you to come along and seemed to genuinely mean it. Martha had noticed, though she was reluctant to admit it. In her experience, men who wanted something from women usually tried to separate them from their support systems. Daniel McKenna had done the opposite, actively encouraging Sarah to bring protection and supervision. It was puzzling and, if she was honest, rather impressive. He's probably just clever, Martha said, though her voice lacked conviction. Some men are good at saying what women want to hear. But even as she spoke, she remembered the genuine pain in Daniel's eyes when he talked about his struggle to care for Emma. That kind of emotion was difficult to fake. Sarah stood up and began clearing the dishes, her movements thoughtful and deliberate. What if we went to visit just to see if the little girl really needs help? You could come with me, just like he suggested. If anything seemed wrong or improper, we could leave immediately. She paused in her work, looking directly at her mother. But if that child really is suffering and I could help her, wouldn't it be wrong to turn away just because her guardian happens to be a man? The question hung in the air between them. Martha had raised Sarah to be kind and caring, to help others whenever possible. It would be hypocritical to suddenly forbid that kindness, simply because it might bring Sarah into contact with an eligible man. Yet the very thought of her daughter spending time with any man, no matter how respectful he seemed, made Martha's stomach clench with worry. "I've never seen you interested in anyone before," Martha said carefully, studying her daughter's face. "But you've barely stopped thinking about this rancher since we met him. That worries me, Sarah. What if his kind words and gentle manner are just a way to win your trust?" Sarah's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't deny her interest. "I won't lie to you, Mother. There was something different about him. But it's not just that he's handsome or charming. It's the way he cares about his niece, the way he included you in his invitation, the way he offered to pay me for my time like my skills actually matter." She sat back down, reaching across the small table to take her mother's work-roughened hands. "When have you ever seen a man treat women with that kind of respect?" Martha was quiet for a long moment, remembering her own husband. He had been a good man, loving and kind. But even he had sometimes expected her to simply go along with his decisions without question. The idea of a man asking for her opinion and actually wanting her present during his courtship of her daughter was almost unthinkable. "What if this is all an elaborate trick?" Martha asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if there is no little girl? Or what if his intentions aren't as pure as they seem? What if he hurts you, Sarah? I couldn't bear it." Sarah squeezed her mother's hands gently. "Then you'll be right there to protect me, just like you always have been." "But Mother, what if he's genuine? What if there really is a little girl who needs help? And what if Daniel McKenna is exactly the kind of man he appears to be?" Her voice grew soft but determined. "Don't I deserve the chance to find out? Don't I deserve the possibility of happiness?" The question pierced Martha's heart because she knew the answer. Sarah did deserve happiness and love and a life of her own. Martha had been so focused on protecting her daughter from harm that she had forgotten to consider protecting her chance at joy. 3 days later, Martha and Sarah sat in Daniel's sturdy wagon as it rolled across the prairie toward Circle M Ranch. Martha clutched her small travel bag tightly, still not entirely convinced she was making the right decision. But Sarah had been so determined to help the little girl, and Daniel had been so accommodating about arrangements, that she had finally agreed to a single day's visit. Daniel rode alongside the wagon on his horse, pointing out landmarks and telling them about the area. "That creek runs year-round," he explained, gesturing toward a line of cottonwood trees. "And those hills to the east have the best grazing grass for miles around." He spoke easily but respectfully, never trying to impress them with boastful stories about his success. As they approached the ranch house, Sarah was surprised by what she saw. The building was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch and flower boxes under the windows. Someone had clearly tried to make it homey and welcoming. A vegetable garden flourished near the kitchen door, and chickens pecked contentedly in their yard. It looked like a real home, not just a bachelor's rough cabin. "Mrs. Rodriguez has been working very hard to make things nice for Emma," Daniel explained, noticing Sarah's surprised expression. "She says children need beauty around them, especially when they're grieving." His voice grew soft. "I never thought about things like flower boxes before Emma came to live with me." A round, kind-faced woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. This was clearly Mrs. Rodriguez, and her warm smile immediately put Martha at ease. "Welcome, welcome," she called out in accented English. "I am so happy you have come to meet our Emma." But when they entered the house, there was no sign of the little girl. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression grew concerned. "She is hiding again," she explained to Daniel. "Since her parents died, she hides when strangers come. It takes time for her to feel safe with new people." Sarah's heart went out to the frightened child. She knelt down near a large chair in the corner of the sitting room, speaking softly toward the shadows underneath. "Hello, Emma. My name is Sarah. I heard that you've been very sad lately, and I wanted to see if maybe we could be friends." There was a rustling sound from under the chair, but no response. Sarah continued talking in her gentle voice, telling Emma about the wildflowers she had seen on the drive to the ranch, and asking if Emma liked flowers too. Slowly, a small face appeared at the edge of the chair, pale, thin, with enormous dark eyes full of pain and wariness. "I used to hide under furniture too when I was scared," Sarah continued conversationally. "Sometimes when you're sad, it feels safer in small dark places. But I found out that talking to kind people can help make the sadness smaller." Martha watched her daughter work with the traumatized child and felt her heart swell with pride. This was why Sarah was so special. She had an instinctive understanding of how to help hurting souls. She glanced at Daniel and saw him watching Sarah with wonder and growing admiration in his eyes. Over the next few hours, Sarah slowly drew Emma out of her shell. They looked at pressed flowers in Mrs. Rodriguez's collection, helped gather eggs from the chickens, and eventually sat together on the porch while Sarah braided Emma's tangled hair. The little girl didn't say much, but she stayed close to Sarah and even managed a small smile when Sarah told her a funny story about a mischievous kitten. Meanwhile, Martha found herself talking with Daniel about practical matters: Emma's schooling, her need for proper clothes, the challenge of raising a child while running a ranch. She was impressed by how seriously he took his responsibilities and how much he had already sacrificed to care for his niece. He had turned his home office into a bedroom for Emma and hired Mrs. Rodriguez specifically to provide female guidance. "I know I'm not the ideal guardian for a little girl," Daniel admitted honestly, "but Emma is family, and family takes care of each other. I just want to do right by her, to help her heal and grow into the wonderful woman I know she can become." As the afternoon wore on, Martha found her suspicions fading. This man was genuine in his love for his niece and his desire to provide the best care possible for her. More importantly, she could see the positive effect Sarah was having on Emma. The child was beginning to bloom under Sarah's patient attention, like a flower that had been waiting for the right amount of sunshine. When it came time to leave, Emma surprised everyone by running to Sarah and throwing her small arms around her waist. "Will you come back?" she whispered. The first words she had spoken all day. Sarah looked at Martha questioningly, hope shining in her eyes. Martha realized that she was facing a choice that would determine not just Sarah's future, but Emma's healing and Daniel's peace of mind as well. Over the following weeks, Sarah visited Circle M Ranch 3 times a week, always accompanied by her mother. Each visit brought remarkable changes to little Emma, who slowly transformed from a frightened, withdrawn child into a chattering, curious little girl who followed Sarah everywhere. Martha watched her daughter work patiently with Emma, teaching her letters and numbers, helping her plant a small garden, and simply listening when the child needed to talk about missing her parents. But Martha also noticed other changes happening. Sarah glowed with happiness on ranch days, singing softly as she prepared for visits and sharing excited stories about Emma's progress when they returned home. More concerning to Martha was the way Daniel looked at Sarah, with growing love and admiration that became more obvious each day. Even more worrying was the way Sarah looked back at him, her cheeks flushing when he spoke to her, and her eyes seeking him out across rooms. "He's falling in love with you," Martha said one evening after a particularly successful day at the ranch. Emma had spoken in complete sentences for the first time, chattering excitedly about the baby chicks that had hatched that morning. "And you're falling in love with him too." Sarah didn't deny it. Instead, she sat down beside her mother, her expression serious and thoughtful. "Yes, I think I am," she said simply. "But Mother, it's not just that he's handsome or kind, though he's both of those things. It's the way he treats people with respect, the way he's devoted to Emma's well-being, the way he listens when I talk about helping her learn to read, and how he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars," Martha added dryly, though there was no real anger in her voice anymore. She had to admit that Daniel McKenna had proven himself to be everything he had claimed during that first meeting in the saloon. He was patient, respectful, hard-working, and genuinely devoted to his niece's welfare. The next week brought unexpected developments. Daniel asked Sarah to stay for supper, with Martha's permission, of course. As they sat around the kitchen table sharing Mrs. Rodriguez's delicious meal, Emma made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Uncle Daniel," she said in her clear little voice, "I think you should marry Miss Sarah. Then she could live here all the time and help me learn everything I need to know." The adults all froze, but Emma continued innocently. "Mrs. Rodriguez says people get married when they love each other and want to take care of each other. You love Miss Sarah and she loves you and you both love me, so we could all be a family." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Daniel's face turned red and Sarah stared down at her plate, her heart pounding. But it was Martha who spoke first, her voice quiet but steady. Out of the mouths of babes, she murmured, looking directly at Daniel. "Emma sees what we all know is true. The question is, what do you intend to do about it, Mr. McKenna?" Daniel stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he looked first at Martha, then at Sarah. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know that my feelings for your daughter have grown over these weeks. But I never intended to court her under false pretenses. Emma really did need help, and Sarah's kindness to her was my first priority. But now, Martha prompted, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. Now I find myself hoping that Sarah might consider making this arrangement permanent, Daniel said, his voice gaining strength. Not just as Emma's teacher, but as my wife, if she'll have me. He turned to Sarah, who finally looked up to meet his gaze. Sarah, I love your gentle spirit, your patience with Emma, your strength and kindness. I love the way you make our house feel like a real home. Would you consider marrying me? Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Daniel, I will marry you. Emma clapped her hands in delight, and Mrs. Rodriguez wiped happy tears from her cheeks. But all eyes turned to Martha, who held the final word on her daughter's future. She looked at the three faces watching her hopefully, Daniel's earnest and honest, Sarah's radiant with happiness, and little Emma's bright with the first real joy she had shown since losing her parents. Well, Martha said slowly, a smile beginning to spread across her face, I suppose I was wrong when I declared that my daughter would marry no one. Sometimes a mother's fierce protection needs to make room for a daughter's chance at happiness. She stood up and embraced Sarah, then surprised everyone by hugging Daniel as well. Welcome to the family, son. Take good care of my girls. 6 months later, the same saloon in Willowbrook buzzed with excitement as the townspeople celebrated the wedding of Sarah Henderson and Daniel McKenna. Emma, in her role as flower girl, scattered rose petals with serious concentration, while Martha looked on with pride and joy. The tall rancher's soft words had indeed changed everything, creating a family built on love, respect, and the healing power of kindness.